Okay, I hope everything is going well in Magic Kingdom as you're writing this and going to be viewing this from your cellular device. All right, so starting with the Stimson Doctrine, if you recall that Japan invades China, and that is going to disrupt Asia, and they'll basically begin to conquer most of East Asia, much of China, including Manchuria. What this does is Secretary of State Henry Stimson refuses to recognize the country of, basically refused to recognize Japan in terms of conquering China after it invades to Manchuria. Who does this remind you of? Failure to recognize a hostile country. Missionary diplomacy. Excellent. Yes, that's a good example of synthesis. See, it's not synthesis is not supposed to be some scary word. Okay, moving on to this, the quarantine speech, which we had read about last week, where he's trying to use economic pressure, again, sort of beckoning on this theme of isolationism to avoid going in, to avoid physical force. It is going to be somewhat unpopular, but nevertheless, it's sort of a last resort in terms of trying to influence countries, especially Adolf Hitler, to scale back some of the things that he's been doing and to sort of hope to restore peace and order. And certainly the use of economic force in terms of sanctions has been used. It's even being used today if you've been following like Russia and Syria in terms of trying to persuade them to get in line with being a democratic nation, or at least try not to kill your people or be as corrupt. So certainly sometimes that occurs as well, and that's what the quarantine speech is seeking to do. And as we read today with the cash and carry, as it's colloquially known at this point, or just known as the Lease Act, where it is essentially still within line with the Neutrality Act in terms of, yes, the United States is technically remaining neutral in the sense that it's not sending men overseas to fight the war. Instead, you're going to provide countries such as Britain, France, eventually the USSR, and China, and they're going to allow them to buy the supplies from the United States based on a loan provided to them. Warships are going to even be provided. I mean, even look at these dates here, 1940. This is well before Pearl Harbor, more than a year. So with the Lend-Lease Act, the whole idea of guns, not sons, and you'll see a number of countries getting involved in terms of being subject to the Lend-Lease Act. And the United States will be known as the arsenal of democracy, that you're fighting for democracy by providing an arsenal of weapons, war materials, resources, food, etc. And again, this whole idea, the crux of the article, that you're lending or leasing supplies to countries whose defense was vital to U.S. interests. And if you look at the Lend-Lease Act aid up until 1943, heavily with munitions, the agricultural products of 1.6 billion, industrial items, shipping, repairs certainly are going to be vital to the World War II effort. In terms of building defense, what's interesting is that the United States Congress is going to pass the Selective Service and Training Act in 1940. The whole idea is to register people for the draft, 16 million in particular. Never before had the draft been instituted when the U.S. was not at war. Civil War and World War I, country was already at war. World War II, we're not at war yet. And yet this shows the mindset of FDR in terms of registering people for the draft. Another 1.2 million are going to be trained of the 16 million. And you're going to now see the defense budget significantly increasing by 1940, and that trend is significantly going to increase today. It's actually the largest part of a budget today. Also indicating that the U.S. is getting involved with World War II was the Atlantic Charter, in which Winston Churchill of Great Britain and FDR are going to meet off the coast of Newfoundland and agree to collective security, economic cooperation. Basically, it's a goodwill gesture that the United States is on board with Great Britain and amongst 26 of the other Allied powers. Yet a month later, German U-boats are going to be attacking American ships, and FDR is going to give the order for the U.S. Navy to shoot on sight of any German ship or U-boat that it sees. So you actually have an undeclared naval war. What does that remind you of? Any other time when the United States had an undeclared naval war, known as a quasi-war, with which country? France. Remember that happened under John Adams? Maybe. We didn't get a chance to read or watch the Day of Infamy speech, but we'll watch it tomorrow, and we'll end here for the day. Everyone say goodbye to Katie.
Bye.
Enjoy Disney World.